Okay, I'd like to welcome all members to today's Cleaner Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I mean, the main agenda item today is going to be recycling and waste, modernising our service. I'd also just like a warm welcome to Councillor Overton. It's your first meeting on this committee, and we're very pleased that you've joined us.
Thank you very much.
Just to confirm as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings. I have not received notice that members or invited attendees wish to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind you that this meeting is being webcast. Therefore, can I ask you to turn off silence your mobile phones and ensure you speak clearly into your microphones. For your information, there are no planned fire drills today, but in case of a fire alarm sounding, please follow the signs to exit the building. I know we're all very familiar with all those procedures. Can I also remind members to sign the attendance register, and perhaps Rachel can confirm what apologies we received today, please.
I've received apologies from Councillor Stuart Ashley, Giles Davis and Gaynor James.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on
and Councillor Neil Wade.
Okay, thank you. We move on to item 2 of the agenda, declarations of interest. Can I ask if any members should have any declarations of interest that they declare them now?
Only, Chair, as far as we are all users of this service, really, I don't know whether we should declare our interest.
My own viewers don't think that's necessary, Stuart. Thank you. Okay, we'll move straight on to item 3 of the agenda, minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of January 2020. Please can I ask members to scan through the minutes for accuracy and confirm that the minutes are an accurate account of the meeting. I'll just whip through them quickly. Page 3, page 4, 5, 6, 7, long minutes, 8, 9, and 10. Can I have a mover and seconder? A minute? And seconded? Okay, the minutes are agreed. Action sheet. Please could Rachel update members on any actions outstanding, which is the next item on the agenda.
There are no outstanding actions.
Okay, we'll move into the substantive item on the agenda, which is the recycling and waste, monitoring our services, and we need to invite the attendee to come into the meeting today. I'll wait till he comes in before I introduce him, I think. Okay, you're settled. I'd like to welcome Craig Mitchell. Craig's the Head of Waste Support of the Welsh Local Government Association. We've got some questions for you, Craig, and I know we've given you a little bit of advance notice about the sort of areas we wish to cover. That's not going to preclude members of this committee asking any questions they wish. But if we could firstly start off with a little introduction from yourself, explaining your role and what it involves, please. Would that be okay?
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you.
As I say, my name is Craig Mitchell. I work for the Welsh Local Government Association and I'm the Head of Waste Support, but I'm also the policy lead on transport and planning. So potholes, bins and planning, probably 90% of your postbag as elected members. As part of that role, I manage the Waste Improvement Programme within WLGA, and that's funded by Welsh Government. And what we do is collect a range of data from local authorities in relation to waste services. So that's finance data, so that authorities can understand how they're performing, which areas are higher cost, lower cost relative to other authorities. And we also undertake detailed benchmarking work. So for the last 3 years, we've looked in very great detail at dry recycling, food waste services and residual waste, because they're the big budget heads within the local authority. And we also produce guidance to support authorities. So the last document we produced was guidance around enforcement to ensure that people are using recycling services. So we may come back to that.
Ask the first question, please. Yes.
Yeah.
This starts. What is the?
Yeah. Firstly, we would appreciate sorry, the last accent that, yeah. The second one there. I do apologise, I've had a larger print, I forgot my glasses. What is the WAG view on the ever-increasing recycling targets? Do you think they are realistic?
Okay. I mean, obviously we're approaching the 70% recycling target, and Welsh Government have an overall ambition to have zero waste by 2050. So if you take that as a starting point, then clearly the recycling targets will have to increase to get to that point where we have no waste, but we just have recycling at the bottom of the hierarchy, and we're promoting things like waste minimisation and waste prevention as well as reuse. The thing that we as WLJ have said very clearly to Welsh Government is there's a range of things that are beyond the control of the local authority. A good example recently is the fibre market, so cardboard and paper has really collapsed, and that's where local authorities have to move this material onto. And we've had feedback from a number of authorities saying that they're actually having to pay reprocessors to take this material. So what we've said to Welsh Government is we need to keep these targets under review in terms of their practicality and deliverability, but we also have to do more work to try and support what Welsh Government call the circular economy. So that's making sure that we've got reprocessing facilities in Wales that can take the material and that there's a market for that material. Otherwise, it will always be a struggle to kind of move the material on. In terms of, I think, the public engagement, I think increasingly we're seeing the public obviously a lot more alive to the issues around particularly plastic, and again I'm sure your constituents are bending your ear on a regular basis in terms of should we be going plastic free and so on and so forth. So I think the public are more interested in recycling and what we're doing with our waste. So I think in a nutshell, we think we need to keep them under review to make sure they're deliverable, but we think that we're on a path towards zero waste, and that's where we need to be as a nation.
I come back on that, yeah. As consumers, we buy on a daily basis, and we buy in all this packaging, and we're the ones who have to. What is the industry doing not to produce all this packaging? You go to a supermarket, your apples are in a bag, everything you buy now is in a bag. But years ago, I was in the fruit and veg business for many, many years. Nothing was ever in a bag. It was all bought loose. But now everything is packaged. You've got the plastic on top, you've got the container underneath, which is not sometimes recyclable. But it's the industry giving us the problem to recycle it. So what are you doing towards getting the industry to improve it?
Members be aware that the UK government launched a consultation on a new Environment Act just recently. And within that act, there's a couple of things that hopefully will help us, because, again, authorities have been saying to us, and the public have been saying to us, we do our bit, but manufacturers are. You can't go into a supermarket and not come out with lots of packaging. It's the reality of it. So the two things that are proposed in the Environment Act are a deposit return scheme, and we're yet to see the detail on how that would work and operate. And, it's likely just to move materials out of the local authority collection system into another system. So we've got some issues about. There are some benefits with it, but we're not sure we're sold on all the benefits. I think the key thing for us is a concept called extended producer responsibility. Now, clearly, at the moment, the producers, on average, pay for about 10% of the cost of collection and recycling services across the UK. Now, our view is the polluter pays principle, it should be 100%. And what this new EPR system is aiming to do is to do that. And depending on how it's arranged, it will be done in such a way that if you're producing packaging that isn't recyclable, you will pay a higher fee. And so that will send a very clear cost driver to the industry that if you have packaging, you reduce it to the very minimum and to make sure that it's easily recyclable because you will pay a lower fee. And that fee will be in some way through Welsh Government given to local authorities to pay for collection services. So from our point of view as WLJ, we're very keen on that because as members you are very, very aware you get 1 year budgets from Welsh Government, you never quite know 1 year to the next exactly what is happening. So this money coming direct from the industry to pay to deal with the consequences of the packaging they're producing should lead to sustainable local services because that money will fund those services year in, year out. So agree, absolutely. For us, extended producer responsibility is a game changer that will lead to sustainable services but will also reduce the packaging that we're having to deal with in the first place.
You mentioned the UK government would consulting on environment. Now, how does that fit in with the devolution settlement? Because I'm just thinking aloud. I remember when the little charge was brought in for plastic bags. Wales brought that in before England, a couple of years before. So there's always this tension, I feel, between what the Welsh government can do and what the UK government can do. And sometimes there's England-Wales laws, sometimes there's not. I just wonder if you've got a view on that.
To be fair to Welsh Government, they've been promoting extended producer responsibility for a number of years. The reason, and as I understand it, they actually looked into the possibility of being able to implement it in Wales. The problem I think they found is obviously Wales has a large land border with England. There's free movement of goods and services across that border, and also the rise of internet shopping, for example. So I think what they found was that it wasn't pragmatic to be able to bring in extended producer responsibility in Wales in a sensible way. So I think they've been lobbying the UK government to bring it in because it really has to affect the whole of the market, and I think that's the reason why it's been taken forward at a UK level now.
There's a number of questions that we're going to put to members, but we'd like a WLGA view on these first, please. So, Norman, do you want to ask I think it's the third question on the list, about public consultation?
Right. Yeah. Do you think there is a need for public consultation on the proposed service changes, and what have other local authorities done in similar situations?
Okay. Perhaps if I just take that a step back, if you like. Welsh Government commissioned some work a number of years ago, which was to look at waste services across Wales and to try and form a view on what would be the best model of service delivery that would be most cost effective, produce the most clean materials to go into recycling and the circular economy and have the best impact around the environment. That was published as a collections blueprint, and it's obviously clearly Welsh Government policy to support authorities to consider the sort of changes that Torfaen are currently considering. So I think that's the evidence base that suggests that this is a better way of delivering the service. Clearly authorities, a number of authorities have now moved to that new system. Typically when you get to a point where you have to have major investment in your service, such as new vehicles, for example. And in the last 6 months, Pembrokeshire have moved to that system. The Vale of Glamorgan have, where I live, and Denbighshire will be moving next year. Cardiff are currently considering options in relation to this. So probably about 14 or 15 authorities deliver that type of system. What we as WLJ always said was there had to be some detailed work at each local authority level to determine if that was the best system. And that's looking at waste services across the board, including household waste recycling centres, the curbside collection, and any other factors that are relevant to the locality. So I think in that context, I think the direction of travel is clear in terms of the type of service that we need to deliver. In terms of what other local authorities done in relation to this, primarily an awful lot of effort has been gone into a couple of issues. One is making the public aware of why these changes are happening. What's the rationale? Because for some people, you're asking them to do something more effectively, do something that may be a bit more involved for them to do. So they need to understand why it is we're doing this. There are lots of misconceptions, again, as members you will know, in terms of the waste services. People think local authorities make millions out of recycling. It's not the case, unfortunately. But it's required. The other issue is around engaging with lots of different groups within the county borough in terms of the changes and what people need to do so that they understand the new system, they understand what they have to do. You deal with issues around confusion around materials. As I say, I live in the Vale of Glamorgan, and there's a chief executive of a neighbouring county borough who was quite upset because he had a sticker on his bin saying he'd put out the wrong materials. The frustration for him was they didn't detail enough about what he'd done wrong and how he corrected it. So there's an awful lot of investment required in terms of that engagement. So I would say that it's really more about that engagement and involvement in terms of the service change rather than consulting whether the service change is the right way to go, because I think the evidence is really there in relation to that.
Thank you for that, Craig. Obviously that's an issue at the end of the meeting we'll be thinking about and coming up with some thoughts. The next question, Stuart, do you want to ask that one, please?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Thank you for that, Craig. That was very interesting. Craig, are there any additional activities you think could be considered to those identified in the recycling and waste strategy that could help Torvine increase its recycling performance?
I think that's a very good question. I think it's something that we're grappling with across Wales, to be honest with you. Every authority is looking to up their performance in relation to the recycling targets. I think in terms of the range of proposals in the strategy, there's certainly not any glaring omissions in terms of what is set out in the plan. I think there's a couple of things I'd like to mention, though. One is, I think increasingly authorities are going to have to prioritise things like niche materials, and by that I mean adult hygiene products and nappies. A number of authorities collect those separately. Now, the difficulty with that is you don't necessarily do that to improve your recycling rate, and it is quite costly to do because you need a separate collection system for it. We're working with Welsh Government and Rhondda Cynon Taf as the lead authority on behalf of all 22 authorities, looking at whether we can procure infrastructure to recycle adult hygiene products and nappies in Wales. And the rationale is that will help us move towards zero waste. So it's those kind of things that we're looking at, and Blaenau Gwent are leading on a project to look at wood recycling, for example. So I think increasingly we've taken a lot of the, I hate to use the expression, easy wins in terms of recycling, and it's starting to look at some of those more difficult materials. Now, clearly, if you're looking, and I know Torvine went down a different route, but some authorities have looked at four weekly residual collections. Conway rolled out that system last year, and a couple of other authorities are looking at that. And clearly, to have a 4 weekly black bag collection, you need to have got everything out of that bag that will cause the householder problems. So if you have separate food collection, as we have universally across Wales, that gets certain material out of. We still have quite a lot of work to do to get people to to use that system. People are generally comfortable using dry recycling systems. The food waste is, I think, a different issue and a different set of problems and barriers in relation to that. But things like nappies for a household with small children, clearly you cannot have those sat for 4 weeks in the property. So it's really seen as a way of enabling those sort of service changes. But clearly in Torvine you went down the route of reducing bin capacity and keeping collection frequency. So I think that's a different way of achieving the same outcome. In terms of anything else in the strategy, I think, again, I've mentioned deposit return schemes are likely to have an impact on the range of materials and the types of materials collected, but at this stage it's almost impossible to predict what sort of changes they will be. Chances are it will be smaller plastic bottles, aluminium tins, drinks tins, which typically are more on-the-go type material and may not end up in domestic recycling so much anyway. But there could be a big saver for the local authority in terms of litter, because these items aren't being littered. So that's our interest in DRS. In terms of extended producer responsibility, again, we're likely to see a change in the packaging. Over the last 5-10 years, we've seen changing in the packaging already through things like lightweighting. So you've had typically things like coffee jars that are made of glass replaced by plastic pouches. It's done for a very good reason. You can move the goods more easily. There's less carbon impact from the lorries and so on and so forth. But clearly from a local authority point of view, you have something glass, which is readily recyclable, replaced by a plastic pouch, which isn't recyclable. So we're hoping that EPR starts to change some of those issues, as I say, so that we have more material that is recyclable and that it will help us move towards a genuinely zero waste society.
Thank you for that, Craig. That's very interesting. When is the outcome of the Rhondda Cynon Taff will lead in on this? When is the outcome expected there?
As I understand it, they've got a very ambitious procurement schedule, and the two issues with it are there's not really someone out there who has the technology fully worked up in terms of recycling nappies, because clearly there's a complex range of different materials in there, and the other issue is that we need to make sure that there's actually an end market for the material that is derived from the reprocessing. So they're trying to do it within 18 months, 2 years, to get to the point where we have an OJEU, a European Union type procurement, and that they can start to try and get the facility being built. For local authorities, I think the key issue is to understand what the net benefit is, because clearly the cost has to be lower than sending the material to energy from waste, because local authorities typically get a 20% recycling rate from energy from waste. So it needs to be an improvement on there. There is a certain gate fee for energy from waste. So again, another prerequisite of the programme is that it will be at a lower cost for the gate fee. So Welsh Government are very keen to look at this, because it fits with their circular economy strategy. They want to see more facilities in Wales. They want to see this as a raw material that helps drive manufacturing in Wales, and so they're very keen on it from that point of view. But I think each individual authority will need to look at their position, how much it costs to collect the material. I mean, for one authority, they're spending £500,000 a year collecting this material separately. So it's not a small undertaking to do that. So effectively 18 months, 2 years will be at a point where, as members, you'll probably be starting to be asked to make decisions about that.
Thank you, Craig. And just very briefly, Chair, if you'll allow me, what about medical waste? Is that collected by the medical profession, I assume?
That's one of the difficulties, actually, because in a number of areas, the local authority have entered into a relationship with local health boards to collect that material. And one of the things that this procurement is exploring is, what can actually go through the process, because, clearly that medical collections contain a whole range of different materials, most of which you would consider as a contaminant in the process that we're looking at. So I think that's one of the additional complications that they're trying to model and understand, and work with the potential providers, the suppliers of the technology, to see what options are there and what's allowable. So I think absolutely that's a critical point in terms of the project and needing to understand, not least because, again, as members, you're well aware that demographics are such that we're all getting older and this is going to become more of an issue.
Very much, Craig.
Craig, can I just pick up on one point you made? And there's nothing in the report here that suggests we're going down that route, but you mentioned some local authorities have gone down the route of 4 weekly residual collections. And you've also mentioned, when you were chatting earlier on, about whatever changes we make, we've got to take the public with us. Now, what's been the reaction to that in those local authorities where that's been happening?
It's interesting because obviously Conway and their members were very exercised by that very issue, and they went to 3 weekly initially, primarily because 4 weekly was seen perhaps too much of a jump at that point. But in terms of services and logistics, 4 weekly makes a lot more sense than 3 weekly, and clearly there's cost savings related to that, but that's not the entire issue driving it. What they wanted to ensure was they provide a range of recycling services at the curbside, and looking at the compositional analysis done about 3 years ago, which is effectively looking at what was in people's black bags and wheelie bins all across Wales, representative sample, found that up to 50% of what was still in people's black bags was recyclable, even though those people were recycling. And some of that is to do with knowledge and understanding, but some of it is also to do with, if you have food that goes off in the container, it is a little bit of an ask to get people to empty it out, wash it out, and then recycle it. People do that, but some people don't. So their drive was to try and incentivize people to use the recycling service that they were delivering. In terms of the public response to it, I think any service change of this magnitude across a county borough will generate a lot of noise. That's the reality of it. I know, again, Pembrokeshire, they got quite a lot of coverage on the BBC. They were very surprised about that because many other authorities had done very similar things to them. But if it's to be believed, there's a BBC journalist who lives in Pembrokeshire, and it became a particular issue for them, as you could imagine. So, and equally in the Vale where I live, local free press full of letters around, the service change, because invariably, there will be issues with the service rollout, because there'll be more material than you expect, less material than you expect. It'll have a knock-on the collection of other materials. So there will be a lot of noise, and that's very clear from a number of other authorities who've made changes. Typically, that does settle down very quickly. Once the new system is rolled out, people understand it, use it, and it's being delivered. I mean, I think some of the issues that were very clear in the Vale example was they clearly made sure that the operatives had a very clear instruction to make sure that all the bags and other paraphernalia were placed back in our case, a large glass caddy for glass, all back in there all back on the end of the property, so that you didn't have bags blowing everywhere, you didn't have a lot of unhappiness around that side of things. So I think that is an important thing. And I know one of the things that you're currently considering is in-cab technology for the new vehicles, and where that has been in place, I think it's made a big difference in terms of that customer relationship, because it's providing real-time information to your call centre or your customer contact point, so that when people are ringing up and saying, you didn't collect my recycling today, the operative has the information to say, well, the lorry went past at 7:45 and there was nothing out, and we've had that reported back to us. And at that point, the conversation changes from someone who's very irate to, oh, well, okay, well, what do I do about it now, kind of thing. So I think having that strategy in terms of your call centre or other facilities to have additional capacity, because you will get an awful lot more calls, but also having staff trained to be able to deal with people and the kind of queries that they're raising, I think is essential.
Richard, do you want to ask the next question? We're going to move on to the recycling receptacles now.
So, yeah, I know, yes. Do you think the options put forward for recycling receptacles are wide enough, or should there be more options for residents to give their views on?
I took the liberty of providing some information to the committee that you probably haven't had a chance to have a look at yet, but it was just to give an example of different authorities across Wales and the types of different receptacles that they use. In terms of the proposition for Torfaen, I think there's probably a few things that are relevant in relation to this. I think the first is, obviously you have very good information about the type of materials that you're currently collecting and the tonnages that you collect. And from the compositional analysis work that I mentioned earlier, you have some idea of the kind of tonnages that are still there to be realised. So I think to a certain extent, some of the receptacles are a function of the range of materials and the amount of materials that you're expecting. The other issue that obviously is quite important is RAP have done an awful lot of work reviewing how collections work, how operatives work, how the different containers work in relation to the vehicle, and clearly what you want is the most efficient and the effective way of doing that, and to get what they call the pass rate as high as possible, because that's a more effective and efficient service. So what you want is something that's not overly complicated for the operatives to use. I think the other issue is certain materials lend themselves to certain containers. So typically plastic and metals are collected together. The plastics in particular is a high volume, low weight type of material. So that lends itself to a bag with preferably a closing lid, so that you don't get a lot of wind-blown litter from it. And also in terms of the operative, it's easy to pick up and empty into the vehicle. The other thing, clearly, for Torfaen is you have some receptacles out there, and I think for most other authorities, likewise, they've tried to utilise the receptacles they currently have in play and define the offer around that. So in terms of the different materials, the last variable is obviously in terms of how much separation you want in terms of the materials. And that really derives from what the market expectation is for different materials, the level of separation, what kind of state they require the recycling in, so that you get the best price possible for it. So that's a very long-winded way of saying that I think there's probably lots of good reasons why you've arrived at the proposition you have, and on one level I'd be wary of giving. It's always good to give people choice, but it's the reason for giving them the choice, what the reason is. And I think, in terms of optimal service, probably the range that you've been presented with probably fit with those wider criteria.
Thank you very much. From the comments that we receive as councillors from our residents, I think our residents would approve of a metals and plastics container with which is a bag which is closable, in preference to the box we have at the moment, because as you say, we do provide nets, but many people don't use them, and then they return to us and say, look, our street is strewn with windblown detritus from this bin, and so that's comments we receive. Also, I think that the residents would oppose a proliferation of the number of receptacles, but I think there's education needed to convince the residents, yes, it needs to be sorted into smaller categories to aid recycling. So I think if it's put across correctly, we should get the public to understand what we're doing.
Thank you for that, Richard, and obviously we'll pick that up towards the end of the meeting when we look at what we think should happen going forward. We're coming at the end of this session now. Craig, I've just got one last question. It's been a really helpful session. Do you know how will the changes in the new legislation on trade waste be policed? And also, do you think there's enough time for the council to prepare for them?
At the moment, it's a requirement for all collections to separate certain materials, and that includes trade waste. But there's a clause in the legislation called TEEP, which is only do it if it's technically, environmentally, and economically practicable to do. So what you find is certainly a lot of private sector competitors invoke that TEEP clause and say, it's not practical for us to do. Now, in terms of businesses, and this is a generalisation, there's a whole gamut of different views within businesses, but particularly where you've got constrained space, you might favour a co-mingled collection because it's just easier to do. So at the moment we have this position where you should be doing the kind of separate collection, but it's not universal. What Welsh Government did with the Environment Act and Part 4 of the Environment Act is make it a legal requirement that those, and a range of different materials, glass, paper, cardboard, plastic, have to be presented by businesses separately for collection, and once it's presented in that way, it has to be collected in that way. It can't be then remixed together. The concern we've had, and part of the reason why Part 4 has taken so long to enact, is we've always said this is subject to Natural Resources Wales, NRW, enforcing this. They're the agency, the regulatory body who do that. Again, we've got grave concerns about resources within NRW to be able to do that. And equally, again, we have a long porous border. So where vehicles are collecting material in Wales and then drive across the border, that's a significant regulatory problem. We've raised this a number of times with the Minister, and in the recent consultation on the Part 4 regs, we again raised it. We have real concerns about whether it will be a level playing field, because local authorities will provide a separate collection service. But we have concerns that, there perhaps will be some competitors out there who won't play the game, so to speak, and we're concerned that there's not enough resource in the regulatory function to be able to ensure that they do. So I think it's something that we're very aware of, we've made Welsh Government very aware of, and it's something that through our regular contacts with the Minister, we continue to feed that in, and we'll be looking for authorities to give us feedback in terms of the kinds of issues and problems that you may have. I think it's something that we're just going to have to keep under review in the shorter term.
Thank you, Chair. Coming in on the back of a very good question that you posed there, Chair, is the effect of some unscrupulous trade waste that ends up in our beauty spots and what have you, and there's a real problem getting that from there. So I think it's very relevant.
We're working very closely with Fly Tipping Action Wales, who are part of Natural Resource Wales, and their role is to try and support authorities in dealing with issues of fly tipping. One of the things that we're doing as WOJ is looking at the data we collect around fly tipping. It gets published annually, and annually I get a phone call from the BBC saying, can you come on the radio and talk about these figures? We're very wary of doing that because what we see from the data is there's quite a lot of variation in the data. We're not confident that the data has really given us the full story. So we're working with a group of 8 authorities on the data, how it's collected, what constitutes fly tipping, different levels of fly tipping, and so on and so forth. And the reason for doing that is if we collect better data, we get a better understanding of what the issue is, and we're in a better position to try and tackle the issue. We've also been tasked by, again as members, you're aware of the public accountable measures, the PAMs that local authorities publish. And we've been asked to come up with a PAM that relates to fly tipping enforcement. The rationale there is there's already one that is about the length of time local authorities take to clear up fly tipping, which is important because clearly you're fly tipping in an area is a huge blight, and you typically tend to get more fly tipping in that area then. But for some authorities, the important thing is to try and catch the culprits, because that's what will really end the situation. And so we need to understand what authorities are doing in relation to enforcement, what is good practice, what is in terms of good outcomes. One of the frustrations we've got is that the courts don't always persecute these cases as strongly as we would hope.
Just on that, we're looking at a fly tipping policy or strategy on the 19th of March, so we're going to pick that up in a lot more detail in a few weeks' time. So I'm not going to dwell on that today.
Just another quick comment, really, Craig, and thank you for that information, really useful. We have been successful in this authority of actually pursuing people to court and imposing fines. So we have been successful in that area.
Okay. That's all the questions I think we've got. Members, are there any further issues you wish to raise with Craig? Craig, that's been outstandingly good. We're very grateful for you coming today. It's given us a lot of food for thought, and we're going to follow up some of the stuff you've spoken to us about now with officers of the council. Is there any last remarks you'd like to make?
Sorry, it's just to reiterate that we have provided guidance on enforcement around recycling. So you may have seen in the media, Swansea rolled out this approach where they were talking to households who clearly still had recycling in their black bags. And this guidance sets out the legal case that allows local authorities to do that and to pursue fixed penalty notices. That, in Swansea's case, was after several interactions with the household to support them and educate them and engage them. And I think when I spoke to them last, they had probably only issued 1 or 2 fines because they see that as failure. And I think that's a very important thing to stress. The other thing to just mention very briefly is we've been working with Welsh Government on a national behaviour change campaign, which launches on the 23rd of March. So hopefully you should see it on your televisions and hear it on the radio. It's around small but mighty. And what it's making the point is Wales punches above its weight in so many different areas, but recycling 3rd best in the world, looking to be the 1st best in the world. But also it's telling people that it's the normal thing to do. Everyone does it. And therefore, if you're not doing it, maybe you should have a rethink. And I think that kind of social norming is very important because it then allows local authorities to talk and engage with people to say, this is what everyone's doing. Why aren't you? So
I think that's a great point to finish on, Craig, that if we could achieve that, we'll have really achieved something special. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next part of the meeting now is that we're going to invite officers and exec members to the meeting. today we're going to have two exec members because there's a little bit of transition. Fiona is moving to a new portfolio and Mandy Owen is taking over the environment. So my understanding is we're going to be doubly blessed. We're still on the webcam, gentlemen, just to let you know. Still on webcam. I let our officers and members just settle a second before. We're still on webcam, but just let you settle into your seats. For Councillor Burnett to come back, and I'll let Cannon settle down. So, as he's brought some wonderful materials there, I can see. Wait till you're settled.
They say this.
Okay. So
Okay.
next, I was just saying to members, we're doubly blessed today. We've got two cabinet members attending. So just to
We put it the other way.
no, let's behave. Just right. So obviously we've got Fiona Cross, who was the cabinet member for this portfolio, and is now, I think it's children now, isn't it,
Yeah,
Fiona?
people like me.
And we've got Mandy Owen, who's not new to this subject, 'cause we used to chair this committee, who's going to took on the new role yesterday, effectively. So obviously there's going to be a little bit of transition, and we're grateful that you're both here. And then we've got the officers who we're very familiar with. We've got Stephen Jarrett, who's the Assistant Chief Officer, Environment and Technical, and Cunnan Edwards, Group Leader, Strategic Waste and Operations. Okay. We'll start off. I'm going to invite the authors. I don't know if it's going to be the cabinet member or the authors of the report, but somebody to give us a brief overview of the report. Who wants to do that? Steve? I did, Steve, before you start. Obviously, as you've been listening to the conversation, we've had Craig Mitchell here, and we've been, I don't know if you followed the meeting, we've had some useful dialogue with Craig about this issue.
Thanks, Chair. I won't go into too much detail of the report. The key question asked by the committee is how should the council seek to modernise its waste and recycling service, including its trade offer. Committee will be aware because they were involved in producing the waste or the work that led to the production of the waste strategy. What we're doing as part of this report is reporting on actions to date on that waste strategy, particularly the action plan associated with it. We want to advise you of our recycling collection services, present you with updated fleet options to provide a single pass collection service, which is the blueprint model that Craig was talking about previously. With that change comes a change in containers, potential change in containers, so we'd like to bring that to your attention and your views on that. We're looking then at our trade waste collection service and how we could make changes to that in future, so we'll bring those up. And talking of things like introduction of new recycling waste streams, and particularly the stretchy plastic that we've got ongoing at the moment with schools and various organisations. I don't particularly want to go into detailed, Chair. If you're happy with that as an overview, is that okay?
I think that's fine, actually,
Yeah.
because obviously we're going to pick up on a lot of the detail in our questions. So, yeah, if members are content, we'll move straight to questions. Ron, I'll start with you again. Our first set of questions are on vehicles. So we've got little themes in our list of questions. Ron, please.
Hi, thank you, Councillor. Basically, just purely size. So the large ones are ones that can get around all of the sort of general size streets that we've got in Torvine. They are the equivalent size to our large recycling vehicles that we have now. But in order for us to get around the narrower streets in Torvine, we have currently a vehicle called a SPOV. A single person operated vehicle is what that stands for. But basically the restricted size RCV, or RV, sorry, is the type of vehicle that would be able to replace that. So that's the difference, just purely the size. Still carry the same materials on there, just they're able to get into narrower streets.
Question, please.
Yes. Can you give a rough estimate of how many vehicles there will be once the new vehicles are delivered in 2022 compared with the current fleet?
Can't quite give you that information yet because the modelling is still ongoing. But it is likely that there will be fewer vehicles than what currently exists, where we have two passes, in other words, vehicles going past the houses twice in order to collect. So we currently have the recycling vehicles going around collecting everything in a black box, and then we have a separate vehicle going around at the moment collecting the food waste and the cardboard, obviously cardboard fortnightly. So the vehicles are passing by twice. With the new vehicles, there's the looking at the different ways on how material is being presented, which I'm sure I'll go on to in a little while, and the result of that and some modelling work that RAP have done has indicated that we wouldn't need the total number of current recycling plus food and cardboard. It'll be fewer as a total, but it'll be more than the current recycling vehicle fleet. So it's in between.
The smaller vehicles that are needed, the way traffic's going and the parking issues, do you think you'll need more of those in the future than we have now?
Yes, I think is the answer. The simple answer is yes, and I'll just caveat that slightly. Currently, we have a SPOV. It's not particularly great in manoeuvring. It's quite difficult. Some of the problems with curbside sort type of operations is, and if you're familiar with them, going down the street, you load to the side. So whilst you've got double parked cars and various things in narrow streets, part of the difficulty we have is when vehicles are parked double-sided, we can't get access to the sides of the vehicles. So even with some of the newer vehicles, the restricted vehicles, we are still loading from the side. So there'll be some of the vehicles that will be probably loading from the side, but they also have vehicles you can actually load from the back. It's a much lower capacity to do that. What we use at the moment is vans to be able to carry that collection out. And basically what that enables us to do for those absolutely the very narrow streets and the ones that we would potentially have problems with parked cars, double parked cars, is we need to look at those types of vehicles to provide that type of solution so that it enables us then to offer the service to the full wide types of streets we have in Torvine. Certainly the intention of all of this is to ensure as a minimum everybody that's currently got the recycling services, all the recycling services has it, and the expectation is it will be able to be expanded to properties that we currently have difficulties because these are designed to go around a lot of those narrower streets where currently our vehicle fleet was designed 7 years ago. So it's a more purpose-built, it's learning from lessons from other local authorities that go down those narrow streets. You know, we've heard about some of the authorities that have rolled them out and they've used these vehicles. Just to mention two local ones, you know, Blanagwent and Merthyr. You know, the nice positive thing is, you know, they share similar characteristics to some of the properties that we have, so we will learn from them. So the answer is, yes, there will be a need for more, but actually it's probably more importantly the types of those vehicles.
Can then you, in the report you said, obviously, at the moment you can't model what impact this will have on staff. But how are you going to engage with staff about this change that is definitely coming in terms of fleet? So can you just enlighten us a little bit about that, please?
We need to engage with the staff on everything. Obviously the service changes is quite substantive. So it's when we go on to the types of containers that we're going to have, there's going to be potentially the need to change some of the recycling containers. So they're going to have to work out how to do that. They will have a lot of concerns about, can you really manage to get that through that many properties with these types of vehicles? RAP, who've undertaken the work, modelling work on our behalf. Craig earlier hopefully would have sort of explained that these systems exist in other authorities. So the modelling work that's come out for us is replicated elsewhere and proven to work elsewhere. So we'll have to do that consultation. We've already done some. So we've already brought these vehicles in and trialled them. And they've been able to, the large vehicle, for example, went around all the streets that we would have expected it to. And the smaller vehicle went around all the narrowest streets we currently go around with the SPOV, I mentioned earlier. But it also got around some of the van rounds as well. So it was quite positive on that. But we will need to consult and involve them then. And in particular, when we do have these new vehicles, there will be different rounds. We will be rerouting and undertaking a review of all the collection rounds. In order for that to work, the crews they are absolutely central for that to make sure that works. We've done it twice since I've been here. We've done it twice in the past, and we've involved the crews. Fortunately, Skinny Bin rollout was one of them. We didn't encounter problems because we used the crews. Absolutely critical to use them. If we just get a computer model that comes out with, that's your round and off you go, it doesn't work. You have to get the crews to have the information on the street.
Thank you, Chair. Do you foresee we could lose some of the staff that we currently have when we've got this new system in place?
Seeing as we're looking for a system to be rolled out by 2022, I know the vacancies we currently have, and I also know generally how many people do leave the organisation. I don't foresee that there'll be a need for individuals to be going through a redundancy process, for example. We may need to cut back on some of the posts, but they won't have a direct impact on individuals leaving the organisation as a result of the changes. I know it's foreseen something a few years in the future, but that's where we sit at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Craig. Cannon.
Do you want to carry on by asking the next question, please?
Yes, Chair, certainly. Question I have, how does the procurement of the new fleet meet our commitment to dealing with climate change? I know some of this is captured in the report, but for the benefit of people who are watching us this afternoon, can you give us some more information?
We're acutely conscious of climate change emergency we've declared as a council, and my chief officer Rachel is working with others across the council in terms of formulating a plan associated with that. Our vehicles, obviously on the waste service, are a high polluting vehicle in some ways. They are high in their fuel consumption. As part of the procurement, what we're doing at the moment is a bit of soft market testing to see if there's any alternatives out there that we could look at. Typically, they'd be electric or hydrogen vehicles at the moment. What the information is from the industry is perhaps we're a little bit too far forward at the moment in terms of those vehicles are a few years off yet in terms of their reliability and their ability to carry out the work that we need them to do. But it's something we're testing market with in terms of vehicle procurement at the moment.
And just as an additional point to that, I know there's some work being done at the moment, actually working with the waste team, where there's some modelling being undertaken and to identify what sort of costs there would be for the infrastructure for the council, in addition to the amount of fuel that's actually used and the potential savings and changes into the future. So that's a continuation of work that Rachel O'Shaughnessy has been doing in the past. I think there was a study done last year, and we're actively involved in that as well. It's separate to this, because it's looking at the the whole fleet and the work that we're doing, but it's something that is very much on our agenda at the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. So are we saying that we can't get best practice from another authority that have gone through this and perhaps are using electric vehicles and such?
none of the recycling vehicles, these ones that we're talking about, there aren't any in existence at the moment, and none have been proposed to be put in place at this moment in time for the large ones. But some of the smaller ones and vans, there is a possibility that we might be able to source something, so that's something we're looking at as well. But as far as the larger vehicles, now I'm going across the board for waste. There have been a couple of trials just for the refuse collection type vehicles. So that's probably the first area that we'd be looking at and being able to utilise on the large side. Whenever we replace our next refuse collection vehicles, that is starting to be tested out there. I think there's been some tests in Manchester and some in Westminster and Sheffield. So it's starting to come up. So that's more likely. We have gone through RAP and through WLGA, the soft market testing. We haven't had any responses back with regards to, unfortunately, direct suppliers for electric vehicles, so they're not quite there yet.
So it's what you're saying, Cunnan, is they are using SPOBs, as you were terming them, and they're electric driven.
There aren't any of that type of vehicles, but the vans, yes, or the smaller vehicles, yes. So with regards to the smaller RRV, they're the most likely ones that they'll be able to convert and adapt. So that's the area potentially we might be able to work with potential suppliers. But there is an element of infrastructure the council would need to have in place at the same time.
Thank you both. Thank you, Chair.
Just out of curiosity, once you procure the new fleet, what's the average life expectancy of it?
The way that it tends to work is it's down to the council procurement or the leasing arrangements. For us in Torfaen it's 7 years. I know there are some authorities that are 5 years, but these vehicles last 7 years comfortably. So other authorities out there at the moment have used them for that.
In 5-7 years' time, technology will have moved on, and this issue will be much more to the forefront, I think. Okay, if members are happy, the next set of questions are around recycling receptacles. And Richard, you can ask the question number 4, please.
Yes. When RAP provided their review of receptacles, how many options did they review before recommending the 2 shown in the report?
They only reviewed the 2. So originally they reviewed 1 in the sense of they have a preferred type of container arrangement. Craig would have mentioned about the collection blueprint and the way that they want to have the collections to take place. The thought process behind it is simplifying and making the collection of the material at the curbside as quick as possible. So the quicker you do the collections, the fewer vehicles and people you need, is effectively the argument in that process. It also keeps the material separated, and as part of that you can have potentially higher quality material. When we were discussing the original scope of that work, we wanted them to consider an alternative, which was a scenario where we didn't increase the number of containers, because the result of their option is to increase the containers. We wanted to look at an option without increasing the containers and understand the cost impact of keeping the number of containers the same. And that's, if you don't mind, Chair, me to do my little demonstration so I can try and explain what the image, or in the report there was an image to try and explain some of that.
Yeah, that's fine. For the benefit of anyone watching on the webcam, the Officer Cunnan now is going to give us a demonstration of some of the receptacles.
I'm going to even simplify it from what was in the report. In the report we've got a food waste caddy and we've also got a cardboard bag. They're staying the same, so if we can just discount those for now. So instead, I'm just going to first of all focus on what we currently have. We generally, for a household, they tend to put 2 boxes out for collecting. They should use a net on both of those boxes. Now we know through experience, and you yourselves will know from experience, very few people actually use the nets. We've done some trials, we've tried to do promotional work. It's probably just over a third of people actually use their nets over their boxes. And unfortunately, because of that, we do have problems with the materials that was originally placed in the boxes being blown out, especially on days with heavy winds. So we have a problem, which I'll get to in a second. But at the moment, we've got 2 boxes. So the scenario that RAP suggested, get rid of 1 box, gone. So we've got 1 box left. We put some material in a bag, cans and plastic, and for them Tetra Pak, but for now just some material into a bag, which is very similar to the cardboard bag. It's got Velcro in it, so it sort of naturally sort of closes, seals itself. It's got the material that tends to be blown out of the boxes at the moment, so it doesn't fall out, even if it's get blown, anything of that nature. So it's looking at a solution of an existing problem we have now. This is used elsewhere within Wales and has proven to be successful at reducing litter from the boxes.
Stuart wants to come in.
Yeah, I wondered, Chair, if we could just feel the weight of the bag.
Yeah, that's it, right. What I've done is I've actually got cans and plastic inside there rather than have just an empty bag. And by the way, it is clean.
What's your glass?
Yes, please.
Very similar to the cardboard bag for those of you who use the cardboard bags.
Just for the benefit of the webcam, this is one of the bags that we're looking at the moment. Yep.
Is it waterproof?
Yes, yes. If I compare this with our existing cardboard bag, I'm not suggesting please ignore the colour, please ignore specifically maybe the design, because that's something we can work on as we move forward. But certainly for this type of thing, it's essential to have the Velcro to keep the lid closed. This does naturally sort of close in on itself, so it seems to be quite a good solution, and the experience of other councils is it has been quite successful. And then Sorry.
I'm going to let the members come in with questions as we go along. It's better.
Thank you, Chair. It's such an important topic that we are trying to scrutinise here. I had the impression in the report that the bag was going to be weighted.
Yeah.
It is weighted.
Is that one weighted?
It is weighted. So what you have, exactly the same as our cardboard bag, right to the very bottom, sorry I've got material in here, I'll give it to you, but right in the bottom here, sorry if I just move along.
That's fine.
Feel the bottom, there's just the material, just
Yeah.
an inch.
Yeah.
It's basically a rubber mat, and the rubber mat is ingrained in as part of it. And if you feel your cardboard bags, you'll find the same rubber mat, and that's the weight that's in it that provides the weighted element.
Why I brought that point up, Chair, is, I mean, it could get wind blown, you know, but the weight is quite good. When it's filled as well, that'll add to the weight.
I think
Thank you, Chair.
Ron wants to come in. Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's going to be cost effective as well if you're going to use that, because we all know the black bins get thrown, we see them all broken. I mean, this is strong, as we can see, so cost effective as well. It's got to be that. And we see the black bins, we've all gone on the streets, they've all blown over. Hopefully that, with that weighting, we'll keep that down as well. And my biggest bugbear has been over the years how many people use the black bins and take them from the centre, and hopefully they're using what they're supposed to. But no, I mean, there's too many, and there's been no control on it. It's cost us a fortune over the years without control, but with this bag, they can't say they're getting broke, because, I mean, you wouldn't tear it. So it's got to be cost effective in both ways.
Just for clarification, this has the capacity of two black boxes.
One box. So this has a capacity, this is the same
Yes.
size in capacity, give or take 5 litres in total.
Okay, so it's the same capacity.
Yeah.
I was only asking because you mentioned that many residents had two black boxes, and I was thinking that would have the capacity of two, but it's correct though that there'll be a further receptacle. Is it for paper?
If I can, yeah,
Yes.
I'll run through.
Okay,
So we're still,
that's fine. Now I recognise it's the same capacity, but for less waste. That makes sense.
Thank you, Richard. Now I think Norman wants to come in. Ken, I'll come back to you in a second.
Are there different compartments inside that bag? It's just open.
so the plastic and cans are mixed together inside.
Yeah, because it would be so much easier for them if it was 3 compartments.
For the plastic and these new vehicles will work is the plastic cans literally we will open it and empty it into the same compartment, because we don't need to separate the plastic and cans. The equipment we have down in Teacorf, which is where our reprocessing facility is, that facility is able to separate the two materials out. So that's a change in how vehicles operate, and one of the reasons why we can actually utilise this vehicle for the wider range of materials compared to the 7 years ago when we had our original silage vehicles. Still concentrate on the wrap solution. And then, yes, you're right, Councillor. They also suggested a bag. Please ignore the bag. This is just a bag that I picked up as a sample bag. But they suggested a bag for paper. So in their solution, we've gone from 2 boxes to 1 box, 1 bag for the plastic and cans, and 1 bag for the paper. Tetra Pak's also in there, but I'll leave that for now. In the alternative, so that's option 2, and in option 1, I've suggested 1 box, 1 bag, and the paper goes in here with the rest of the materials in here. That does slow down the collections, but it means we go from my sort of suggestion, 2 boxes to 1 box and a bag, same number of containers. Because I think one of the concerns, and I've raised with the committee to consider, does the committee feel that there's an issue with regards to increasing the number of containers for each household in Torfaen or not? Because if we do increase, there's a potential for further savings. If we don't, the reality is, we can still deliver the model, but we can keep to the same number of containers.
The hands up. I think Stuart, you were first, then Richard, then Ron.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Conan, for that. The paper bag, could you give us some idea of the paper that's deposited? Because the impression I got, there's not much paper put out.
No.
That's right, I don't need the bag, but never mind. The quantity of paper utilised nowadays compared to the past is much lower. So I think it is probably, when you're looking forward, projecting what's going to happen into the future, I think the quantity of paper is going to decline, which is why I'm suggesting as an alternative option to put the paper into here, because I think that residents will, they may put this bag out every week with only 4 or 5 sheets of paper in there. They may store it up for a month and put it out once a month. But I think 4 or 5 sheets of paper in the box we could potentially collect without massively altering the speed of collection. It does have an impact, and that's why we asked RAP to undertake the modelling to see if it had a significant impact. It doesn't have a significant impact. It does have an impact, but we think the costs are very, very similar. So as a result, I don't think it's a cost. Decision isn't purely on cost.
Next, and then Ron.
Yes. If you watch the webcast of the first part of the meeting, I did mention perceived opposition to a proliferation on the number of receptacles, but I'm in the opinion that we have to challenge our residents so that if further curbside sorting increases our capacity for recycling, that yes, we have to challenge our residents. So this does become, I think the gentleman from WLGA mentioned, it becomes a social norm. So I think it's a case we will have to challenge our residents, and if there is a proliferation in the number, it's best for the environment, we have to go ahead with it.
Thank you for that, Richard. And as I said earlier when you made the remarks, we'll pick that up when we deal with the recommendation stage of the report, and you'll have ample opportunity to make your case.
Okay.
Ron? Steve, go on.
Yeah, it's certainly a good point. I mean, lots of receptacles, particularly in our more traditional terrace street environment, is difficult. But we also know, you mentioned you used the word challenge to the residents, and that's a great way of putting it. But equally, we know that residents want to separate their materials more as well. There are some elements of people who fully appreciate the benefits of separating the materials, taking it all out of one box, improving the windblown litter windblown litter issues, and equally, getting high quality recyclate, which they want to put out to our trucks, is where some of the residents want to be. So equally could be a welcome thing for some residents.
And I'll just add to that and say the residents take part in the dry recycling of the boxes really well. We've got very high 90+% usage of the boxes. People take part they recycle, they do a great job, and you know they are taking ownership of that waste. I know Craig made reference earlier about food waste; it's a real challenge, but it's certainly as far as the black boxes, people take part. And part of the problem with the windblown material is the success of people putting so much material in the boxes. So one little message: at the moment, there isn't a limit in the number of boxes people can use. So if they find they've only got the one box and it's stacked up high, they can always come down to the council office and ask for another one.
You wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kenan, for that. Again, how many receptacles would we get people to use? I think if we get too many, get too many complaints. And the blue bag you just showed there for papers, personally, it took me 6 months to fill that. Because maybe a newspaper once or twice a week. So you'd have a bag sat there and sat there, and if somebody's put in 2 or 3 newspapers in, and fair play to them, the recycle is extra work, just take a couple of papers out where they could put it in that. But I think if you have too many containers, people will complain, and that's when you start getting a lot of things blown about or whatever. But as I say, I would take 6 months to fill that newspaper. I'm sure with online newspapers now, and everybody goes online to watch the Argus or whatever, but it's quicker to do it online, and they don't need to buy a paper.
And for any members or any residents or anybody watching as well, just to highlight it, in addition to newspapers, we currently recycle, and in future will continue to recycle, not only newspapers but also letters, envelopes and all that type of material. So there's other materials that can also go in there.
Just bring up one issue that Craig actually raised, Craig Mitchell. It's about niche materials, adult hygiene products and nappies. What's the proposals going forward on that?
Niche materials can encompass all sorts of stuff, because obviously it tends to sort of fall into things. AHP, first of all, Craig made reference to the fact that there's an ongoing investigatory or procurement, looking to undertake procurement at the moment. The outcome of that project will determine what we need to do with regards to ourselves. It's not really for residents' purposes. It's not going to change the collection systems and the method of collection. They currently place the material in a yellow bag. If they've sort of gone to collect the bags, they place it alongside the wheelie bin. The difference would be how we collect it. So in other words, do we have a separate collection set of vehicles that come along and collect that in order for it to go to an AHP treatment facility? At the moment, we collect it at the same time as the residual, the black percolated bin. So it's just purely a case for us. There is a big investment on the collection side in order to do that. And as Craig referred to earlier, there's uncertainty at the moment what the cost for the treatment of it might be, and hence the procurement.
It's just I can imagine certain people would be concerned about that, young mothers or elderly people using the adult products. That's fine.
And then just on the other niche materials, there are a whole range of other niche materials we're looking at. Things like electrical items, is what they tend to call them. We're looking at collections of small electrical things like toasters and kettles and things like that as well to come through the system.
His glasses. Informal committee.
We've trialled the vehicles that currently exist, mentioned earlier, and we've been able to get around. So that's the first thing, that the type of vehicle seems to suit the properties and streets that we have in Torvine. The collection bags and systems that we're discussing here, that's part of the reason wanting to start this consultation process, if you like, as far as deciding on how wide we undertake this sort of discussion on the sort of collection containers. The difficulties in general is you can't have a free-for-all for recycling, because you have to build your service based around some criteria. We've obviously been fortunate in some respect. We are a curbside sort authority. We have been a curbside sort authority for 20 years. So our residents are familiar with putting material in boxes and separating the generality of recycling into various containers. Some of the service changes that have happened elsewhere in Wales is where they've gone from placing all the material in one big bin, wheel bin, and then separating out. That's caused them a lot more problem, and certainly one size fit all, no, it doesn't. For us in Torfaen, we have identified areas and properties that even the box system we have right now doesn't quite work. So we have done some niche solutions for those sort of properties. They're not a large number of properties in Torfaen, but they exist. But we also have some flats where we have some difficulties, and we have a more restricted offer of recycling at this moment in time. The option that we'll have with the new fleet is we may be able to review that to be able to offer a wider range of materials. And it's not normally to do with the collection, it's purely the storage available at those locations that cause it the difficulty.
You jumped straight into our next question there, which was what process we put forward to the service for the high-rise buildings in the borough, which I think we've dealt with. But Stuart?
I want to come in on the back of Ron's question about that, and you clarified a point really for me, Canon, is that there are some properties that have only got no back door entrance, no gates, no storage facilities, and by what you were saying earlier, there are a couple that are using a bag system. Is that correct? And is that still available?
Yeah, we've utilised it's very, very limited in those sort of areas. Now, this isn't so much to do with the collection system, the vehicle systems at the moment. This is more about development of our recycling depot. We've got very restricted ability to be able to sort through materials that are collected together. You would have heard from Craig about commingled isn't the way forward. Absolutely not for the majority, the huge majority of residents in Torfaen. Sorting out the material at the curbside works, and it works effectively for them. But there are those areas, high-rise and the likes, that you can never have. If there's 80 properties in 80 flats, you can't have 160 boxes in a bin store. So we have to find an alternative way to be able to do that. Could it be a sort of limited commingled? And as I said, cans and plastic are in here. So we could potentially have a solution for places we currently don't have a recycling offer that immediately gets plastic and cans inside some sort of a method. They're quite light, they're easy to carry, easy to store. So we'd be looking at it on a case-by-case basis. This isn't, as Councillor Burnett mentioned, there's no one-size-fits-all. For these niches, we have to have a solution specific to those property areas.
Thank you, Chair.
I think we've dealt, unless any members have got a different view, we've dealt with the receptacles now. We'll move on. Are you happy, members?
Yes.
Okay, we'll move on to trade waste. It's Norma next, I think. Janae, Norma, please.
Chair. How will the changes in the new legislation on trade waste be policed? And do you think there is enough time for councils to prepare for the changes?
So where we are at the moment is legislation is already in place in Wales, which requires businesses to separate their material. But it doesn't say how, and it doesn't really give them a clear police, if you like, or a way of enforcing it. Welsh Government consulted at the end of last year on a range of materials, which I've referred to in the report, that they require to be collected separately, and making it legal duty for anybody collecting the waste must collect those materials separately. So you can't collect it commingled, basically. It would be illegal. They refer in the legislation that NRW, Natural Resources Wales, would be the police authority, if you like, for that. And they also highlight the fact that food waste will not be allowed to put down the drains, if through macerators and the like. That police force is the local authority themselves. So just as a side issue. There has been a lot of debate and discussion from local authorities throughout Wales, and I'm sure through businesses as well, in the consultation responses, on what powers is the NRW going to have, how much resource are they going to have, are they going to really police it well? Because it is, from a waste perspective, from my department's perspective, it is essential that this is policed rigorously. Because right now, we have got waste companies outbidding effectively us for some of our customers by going out and saying, don't worry about that, just chuck it all in a bin. Now, if that continued when the legislation kicks in, it would put us at a financial disadvantage. It would make it difficult for us to be able to continue, and other companies that would be doing the right thing. So we need to make sure that that enforcement happens on day one. So your question, unfortunately, I can't quite answer because they haven't come back with their plans yet. But they were talking about fines and sort of lots of punitive damages for any companies found not to do that. Are we ready? We will be ready. Effectively, it's doing the same as you do as a curbside sort collections. We also offer recycling to all of our commercial customers that are currently with us. Not all of them take it up. But we do offer a recycling service. What we don't collect to the curbside from our customers at the moment is cardboard and food, but we will have that by the time the new legislation comes in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Canon, you said about food waste going down the drains when you have the kitchen waste disposals. I mean, if people are actually still producing these in the business, I mean, they sell them to the customers are buying that because that's what the intention is, to put the waste down the drain. So you've got to be looking at the producers of this kitchen equipment. So that's the first step. If they are producing this and selling it to the householder, yeah, you're never going to stop it. They always go, as long as the customer's going to buy it, there's only one way, is not to produce a waste disposal unit for your kitchens.
This is purely for business. This isn't domestic. This is business. So currently in Wales, it's going to be banned to use anywhere in Wales the macerator at a business premises. So these would be generally, they're all the licensed facilities. The council goes and visits it.
Yes.
Yeah. So as part of that inspection regime, it'll be making sure that they haven't got a macerator that's working and they've got a waste carriers like a waste arrangement in place for somebody to collect the food waste. Yeah, it's restaurants and the like that tends to use those sort of facilities.
Chair, on that topic, I think Welsh Government are going to be making sure that happens. Going back to the policing with National Resources Wales, Craig seemed to hint that the resources there are pretty sketchy. So I'm keen to see the outcome of that.
I absolutely agree with Craig's concerns, and I think it's all local authorities, and it's obviously definitely from Torfaen's perspective, the fear is that they're not going to adequately resource NRW to be able to undertake that policing effectively. NRW is stretched at the moment. I know in the report, and they were suggesting that they are looking to invest significant amounts of money as well into other areas, and they do highlight NRW as one of those. But at this moment in time, we're waiting for the detail on exactly how that would take place. But it is a big fear from this authority, from Torfaen, and I know from Craig and from his comments, that's the weakness, I think, within this piece of legislation. I think everything else is great. It's about stopping materials being thrown away, getting hold of it, making sure it's recycled in the same way as we're talking about curbside for residents, getting good value from the material back. It helps the business get a much greener sort of response back, challenge what sort of materials that they have. So it's all great for all of that. But you've got to have the police force there to be able to take action against people who should take shortcuts.
Because unfortunately we're seeing more incidents of flight tipping, and I think it's going to keep on.
Sorry, Chair, just to give members comfort on that, it was a subject of discussion at a lot of our sort of professional meetings where we meet with our colleagues across Wales. There was general concern about the policing by NRW, so all those concerns would have gone back to Welsh Government as part of the consultation.
And Torfaen provided a response as well, and we made that absolutely clear. It's a big worry.
Thank you. We'll move on now. We're going to talk about stretchy plastics next. Stuart, I think it's your turn. Number 9.
Thank you, Chair. Stretchy plastics, I read in the report, it's a very interesting initiative, well received. Just wondered how long will you test the expanded locations for collecting the stretchy plastic before deeming it successful or not?
I'm going to go through a potted history now, sorry. So the stretchy plastics, to explain, this is the type of material you've got in your household. They're the plastic bags, your bread bags, any material, any of this sort of plastic packaging that you have where if you pull it, it'll stretch. It's not the crinkly type stuff, and it's not cling film. I know that stretches, but it's not cling film, but it's that type of material. There's a business in Torvine, Capital Valley Plastics. We were in discussion with them and they highlighted that they were keen to, instead of using virgin plastic, brand new plastic, they wanted to use materials that had been used elsewhere, basically to recycle the plastic and reuse it to make their damp-proof membranes, which is what they produce. So we had a discussion with ourselves, with our team, and we thought we could possibly help them. A big concern is contamination. It is a very difficult message to get across. Stretchy plastics are what we've settled with as something that I think people have generally understood looking at the trials. So initially we had there was a bring bank in Carmarthen, and it was just by Carmarthen Hall, and it was literally just for the community there. There was a bit of engagement with the community, and they placed some material so they could just see the type of material householders produced. That was just a tiny trial. We then expanded it to include the House of Waste Recycling Centre. So we'd, at that point, recently introduced the bag sorting process, where residents were bringing their black bag of material, sorting through the black bag and recycling some of the items within there. So there was an opportunity for us to intercept that material and going, oh, that's stretchy plastic, could you put that in that container over there, please? So as a result, we were able to get quite a bit of material, and they trialled that material, and it was very successful. And we also thought, well, unfortunately, this isn't something that we could roll out through our curbside collection system. The amount of contamination would cause us huge problems with the rest of our services. So we approached a local school, Ysgol Bryn and we asked, would it be possible if we engaged with them, explain what the process was, could they engage with us and try it on a trial with the children there? That proved hugely successful for Capital Valley. So they said, right, we'd like to expand this now. The contamination levels is less than 10%. The amount of work they have to do to separate that out is small in comparison, and it's delivering them savings. And in particular, I think it would be fair to say from their point of view, really, it's more about the environmental impact. They're working with Oceans Plastic, which is a national charity on a national organisation's pressure group. And there's a lot of work that was being done to try and pull together some educational promotional materials. So we looked at how we could roll this out further. So we thought we'd offer it to all the junior schools within Torvine, and that's where we are at this moment in time. So we've had 12 schools up until yesterday, and that might be different by today, but 12 schools have already signed up to come on board, and we're starting the communication campaign at those schools at the moment. We're also involving nurseries, some of the nurseries as well. So this is about getting small amounts of plastics from each of these locations, and we've also engaged with Blaenau Gwent, who are also coming on board with us to do the same as we're doing, bit by bit. And this could potentially be rolled out elsewhere within Wales. So whilst we have RAP, I mentioned before, as an organisation that did some modelling for us, we have kept them in the loop so that they know what we're doing. And whilst we're talking about small quantities in plastic, it does have a huge impact on the environment, that plastic. So it's a way they're going forward. So sorry it's a potted history, but it's important to highlight, in some respect, there is no end point. This is about rolling out.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think we should be hugely proud about the fact it's a local business finding a practical solution right on our doorstep, and I'm really enthused by it. I definitely encourage members to view the song that the children came up with as well at Ysgol Bryn. I was going to say the Cwmbran one. Make sure I don't get them mixed up. I actually had a tear in my eye. I was blown away. It was really special that the kids have actually gotten behind it, their parents are behind it, that the teachers are supporting this additional work. And that you've got to think how little impact it has then. Because instead of it being travelled off to here, there and everywhere, it's just here, it's just on our doorstep. It's just like our glass recycling being recycled in Springvale Industrial Estate. That's the clever stuff, because then we're not creating more CO2 and pollution through the travelling. And an additional point, talking to Carmarthen Plastics, is that they've successfully persuaded or whatever, the Screwfix and B&Q to also send their wrap to them as well. Now this is nationally, this isn't just the B&Q in Cwmbran, this is across the board. Another huge success, and if big businesses like that are going to buy in, it's another sort of stamp of success, I feel. So. So, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your thoughts on that, Fiona. I think it's a brilliant initiative, and especially involving young children in all our schools. I congratulate them on that. What I wanted to ask, is there any collection cost to the authority for doing this? And is there any possible income generation? Because as you pointed out, they're now using virgin plastics, so they're not using so much cost. Just wondered those 2 points.
We don't collect it. So Capital Valley themselves collect the material, so there is no cost to the local authority of the collection. There is a cost for all the education work that we're doing, but it isn't something that we see as an extra that we're doing as an extra cost. We engage with the schools all the time, and this is a fresh initiative. Rather than just going and saying, it's important that we recycle waste and want to do stuff. This really brings it home to people in Torvine that this has been done in Torvine. So it's not, even though there's a cost for doing the education and doing all the work that we're doing at the moment, there's an education officer that's been set up within Capital Valley who's working alongside our education officer. So effectively helping to train the person up. And we're doing a lot of the facilitating work with Blanagwent and the likes to try and roll it out further. So there is some minor, and it is minor cost. It is great news. It is, as a team, we're really proud of where it's got to right now. We work very closely with Capital Valley anyway, with regards to things, and I know they're finding it a real sort of plus, really, that they can see something actually being delivered on the ground. And when you look at all the strategies from the Welsh Assembly and our strategy as well, they talk about closed loop recycling. That is closed loop recycling. People here in Torvine's making this stuff or throwing the stuff away from businesses or from producers, the packaging, but it's actually going for the benefit of people in Torvine through the recycling. So it's great, positive news. It's not happening elsewhere in Wales at the moment, but it is here.
Point to add on is that I don't know how it would compare to the virgin plastics, but there is a resource issue for the Carmarthen plastics as well, because they then have to take the contamination out. So when I was talking to them the other day, they were talking about employing potentially more people, because as the more amounts come in, the more contamination they're going to have to sort through. So how that cost effectively that compares, as I say, to virgin and to this recycling, either way, they're committed to the outcome in terms of this is the right thing to do. So
They're satisfied with the contamination,
Yeah.
or as it expands, I can understand that. Thank you, Chair.
And actually, that's a huge amount of work that we've done with them to try and make sure that we, very quickly we could have just rolled something out and it would have fallen flat on its face because the contamination was too high. So we spent a lot of time trying to work together to find simple messages to start with, very sort of controlled environments to try and make sure that the messaging is working, hence starting with one school and spending a lot of time with that school making sure the messaging worked. Obviously, as we expanded to 12 plus more schools, we might encounter some problems, but at least we've got to start and knowing what to look for.
Just picking up on what Craig was telling us, and he was talking about very positively at the end of his chat to us about the National Behaviour Change campaign this month. I mean, it all cuts into that in a big way, and I think it's not wasting money, it's the way forward, really. Okay, we've got one more question on stretchy plastic, and that's for Richard to ask, which is question 10. Then we'll move on to the final two questions.
How do you intend on promoting the new locations that take the plastic?
Difficult. It's very much based within the schools. Obviously, schools are not going to be looking to encourage members of the public coming into their environment. So it's very much promoted at this moment in time through the services that we're using purely for the use of the people within those schools. However, we have one facility which is open for all members of the public, which is the Household Waste Recycling Centre. So at this stage, the school is going to be limited by what they feel comfortable within their own individual environment. As I say, it's a partnership with Capital Valley. It isn't a council-run sort of project. It's a joint project. And what we want to do is make sure that we bring the schools on board all the way through and not put a barrier in that they fear that they can have strangers coming onto site.
And I just wanted to add that we have actively gone out to promote it. I'm not actually. I know a quote's been taken off me, and I was at Brennan in school, where they did the song. But what we're doing is actually a competition. So I hope that the quote's gone out. I hope that press release has gone out. But we're doing a competition across all primary schools and asking them to collect the most. And there's a cash prize as well. So anybody watching on webcast, you could get some money for the school. And I would hope that everybody chips in and does their best to try and increase it. And of course, there's that behavioural knock-on as well. So say the children are bought in, the parents buy in, the extended family start to then collect, and then they start to understand that they can take it to the household waste and recycling centre. So, you know, it's a nudge effect as well.
And as Fiona mentioned there about the over impact, the tonnages are tiny. So we're talking about only a few tonnes per month in total. But if people who previously were not recycling are recycling that plastic, they're probably recycling the other material as well. So the tonnages add on.
I'm going to ask the next question, which is question 11 on public consultation. Perhaps the language ought to be engagement, really, not public consultation, because just to make the point, this committee isn't a decision-making body, and in discussions I've had with members prior to the meeting, it's really important that whatever's decided at the forefront is what the residents will buy into. So we need to bear that in mind. However, we can ask this question. If it is decided to go out to public consultation on this, what do you have in mind to ensure that all residents have the chance to be involved?
We'll listen to anybody that gives any potential ways of engaging with the public. Back in 2015, when we did the skinny bin, we had an extensive programme of consultation. So we went to supermarkets, we went to community halls, we did a My Say consultation, we did a whole host of stuff, events, promoted it through the media, through social media. We did a lot of engagement to try and get as many people actively involved and aware of what was being done. And I think that proved hugely successful when we rolled out Skinny Bin. I think, you know, we weren't overwhelmed with negativity. I think the consultation worked quite effectively, so people knew, and they had a choice. They came back with the Skinny Bin as the preferred of the three options that we consulted upon at that time. So we'd be looking at doing something very similar. So, you know, the team are already talking about, we'll be back out to the supermarkets. I know we do supermarkets anyway, and consultation events. And it is going to be an important feedback, because you made the point, specific point really, which is right. It's what the residents are going to be happy with, really, to engage in and to use. You know, it's easy to come up with a solution. I think this is best. But if the residents, when they come across it, go, oh, that's not going to work because of, I never thought of that. And that's why it's important to get the feedback from the residents. And whilst I may have a view on whether or not these three containers are the right ones or not, I think it's useful to get that feedback.
This committee feels the same. We may have views on this, but at the forefront we're elected to represent residents, and obviously we want their views to be gathered and listened to, I think. But we'll pick that up, committee members, after this session finishes in a minute. Another thing is, you won't be here for this part of the meeting, but we've gone out to the Torfaen People's Panel, and we've had one lady have sent us 4 pages of really positive comments, in which I know Kathy's going to share with you. You'll pick that up on the webcam later, but you will be getting those comments, which were really helpful, actually. Okay. Ron, we're going to move on to the final question, and we're going to let you have the last question.
Thank you, Stuart. It's good to share. How have you worked with other local authorities to see what they are doing, especially those who are ahead of us in the process, so we can learn from them?
2 ways, really. One is just engaging with RAP. RAP, which is the organisation we've undertaken the work with, they've worked with all authorities, all 22 authorities in Wales, and all those that have changed to these types of vehicles, they've gone through that organisation. So first of all, they were able to give us pointers and lessons learned, what to avoid, what to try. But as an officer, well, as a series of officers, we've gone out to look at what actually happens. Blaenau Gwent in particular, we've gone out and witnessed, actually gone together to witness the collection system, see how it works. We've trialled it in our authorities, but we wanted to go out and talk effectively to the crews, just to find out what the problems, issues, anything that they might encounter and highlight. Obviously, They may not tell us the full story when we're there, but I think they were quite open and honest.
You sound really
Highlighted it.
sceptical. Of course, they'll
Well,
tell
I
us
just
the
think
truth.
it's, obviously when people are stood around, you can feel a little bit intimidated. But I think from the feedback that we got open and honest feedback of some of the difficulties they had with their vehicle fleet. Now, the vehicle fleet in Blanagwent and Merthyr, for example, are a slightly older generation. There are lessons learned. So cardboard, for example, when they originally rolled them out, they didn't have any compaction on the vehicles, so they fill up really quickly. Now the new vehicles have that compaction, so they don't fill up too quickly. So there's a lot of work we'll continue to do by going into other local authorities to understand what are the weak points of these vehicles so that we can try and ensure that they're addressed. The other thing as well is when we go out to procure the vehicles, we start at the point of understanding what the previous procurement went through, because each procurement learned lessons. So we want to understand what worked, what didn't work in the last lot of procurement, and then we add our own little spin on it as well of concerns and things that we have. We've undertaken lots of procurements in the past and put in various clauses, actions or requirements of bidders that have proved successful for us as an authority and clear, which is the important thing for the bidders.
Just come back on that. Yeah, as you said, you went up to see how other people are doing it, and then last week they were collecting by my house, and because they blocked me in, so I had to go out to cut them. So I asked one of the guys there and explained how the lorry worked when it fills up and it goes up, and it's quite interesting. And nobody knows. All you see is it going on, but I'd like to see what it was doing and how did it get it all in there, And I just think as a committee we should all come down to Panteg and have a look one day at the vehicles and how they all work.
In addition to that, I think it'd be really good for this committee to go down to T Corch as well and see how the facility there works.
We've been there once.
I've been there a couple of times, but the more recent one shows how they've got the sorting system as well. So it's like a mini MRF. So it's got that. That's the right term, isn't it? Mini MRF, near enough. Yeah. Where it's actually pulling out. But yeah, it all builds on your learning, and so that you're more able to then visualise and understand the systems.
We'll pick that up when we chat about recommendations. Yes. Okay, Stuart, you want to come in?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Canan, you touched on the procurement process, and with these new vehicles, they're a bit more intricate, especially with the compounder, and things go wrong with technicalities. And have we got any warranties in place in regard if vehicles do break down and they do need repair? Because you only need one or two of those off the road and you've got serious problems, haven't you?
So as Steve's team is obviously on the fleet side, they do have warranties and requirements for servicing or looking after vehicles over a period of time with regards to mechanical breakdowns of manufacture, I suppose. There's in-house servicing of vehicles, so the council's fleet department undertakes some of the servicing work. One of the things just to highlight, which is an added benefit of how these local contracts or local authorities working together works. One of the things that have been set up regionally throughout the whole of Wales is, in addition to each council's spare vehicles for these recycling collections, each region has a setup of additional vehicles that are held centrally that each authority can call up to be able to utilise. So if you run into a particular problem where we're going to have to send 2 or 3 vehicles back because of a warranty issue, always the difficulty you have is these vehicles don't just sit somewhere else, so you can't call another 3 vehicles. So as to resolve that problem, RAP and Welsh Government put in a project to buy some additional spares that sits in a region, and those vehicles are there to be able to be utilised in periods of problems, and also when individual authorities roll out new schemes, such as when we do this. So what you find when you roll out a scheme is obviously the crews are not familiar with the new rounds, potentially the residents might not be familiar with the split of materials, so the collections take a little bit longer. So you have the problem of you're modelled what you want to have and modelled, and it'll work as far as the collection systems, but on day one you always encounter a problem because you're a little bit slower. So you've got to build in some additional capacity early on to be able to make sure that residents don't end up with missed collections, but we for the resident it's seamless, but for us it's still part of that learning process to get used to the vehicle and used to the rounds. So these additional vehicles are also being used to facilitate and help authorities going through those changes so that it minimises impacts for residents. So it's good joint working. All the, it's ourselves, Bonnie Gwent and Merthyr, that these vehicles are servicing at the moment when we get there. But that's why when I talk about we've had vehicles here to trial and test, it's from that vehicle fleet so that we can actually trial them. And you mentioned earlier about it'd be nice to look at sort of the vehicles. What we can arrange is we can arrange one of those vehicles to come down and do collections, basically collecting our existing vehicle materials on those vehicles, and you can see it in operation.
Come back very briefly, Chair. Thank you for that, Canon. I'm much more reassured now that we've got reserved vehicles in place and our rounds will be completed. Thank you very much, and I'd like to take up the offer when we have these vehicles to perhaps go on board the vehicles and see how they actually work.
Yeah. Always happy for extra loaders to assist us on collections.
Go that far.
Members, are there any other questions you'd like to raise with the officers or the Cabinet members? Okay. Issues any final words you'd like to say?
Chair, if I could just ask one. I'm sure it's included within the report, so I'm sure the committee's considered it. But it's about technology going forward on the new vehicles. We've sort of highlighted three things which could be on the trucks. It's trackers, cameras, and then in-cab technology. What we've done a lot of work on over the last sort of 6 to 9 months is the customer journey. And digital technology can help with that customer journey. It can just speed up the process, and it can provide firmer answers quicker. We're considering it as officers, and obviously in conjunction with Cabinet member. But it's something, for that, certainly that latter element of in-cab tech, we'd appreciate the committee's views on it. If I could highlight that with you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Steve. And we did actually have a discussion with Craig about this, and he was telling us, if somebody rang in at 7:30, rang in and said they'd been collected, and they could check, and then there would be a different type of discussion if they hadn't put it out in time. Yeah. So, although we didn't ask you a specific question, right, we did deal with it under that. And and we will consider it when we look at our recommendations. So
and the benefit or potential benefits of that type of system is it can work very similar to a sat-nav, effectively with a route. So somebody unfamiliar with the round can step in to drive that vehicle and follow it exactly where it's going. Assisted collections are flagged up, so it's quite an effective type of process to assist with ensuring that you don't end up in situations where properties are missed.
And as I said, we did deal with that with Craig, so we'll consider that in a minute. Well, thank you all for coming along today, and it was much appreciated, and particularly you, Kenneth, for bringing all the props with you. And that was very good, actually. Thank you very much. We'll pause. Can we pause the webcam just for 5 minutes while the guests leave, and we can have a quick comfort break? Okay, that was a very useful session, I thought, yes, members. Now, what I need to inform you about now is that we've had 2 emails from members of the Torfaen People panel, and if you'll indulge me, I'll read these to you. And I did mention to Canon during the previous discussion that we would share them. The one is, I won't go into the people's names because of data protection regulations, but is there anything I feel I can add as Torfaen County Borough Council are doing a really great job when it comes to recycling? One question I would ask is, has a feasibility study been done on whether the sorting would be more effectively sorted at the waste transfer station using automated sorting? ? This would make sorting more efficient and quicker. Just a question I would ask, but I think the Torfaen County Borough Council is a very good one. So that's one comment from the Torfaen People's panel. And the second comment is from another member of the panel. Thank you for your copy of the recycling report going before the scrutiny committee. I am all in favour of increasing our recycling. I have only a couple of comments. Number one, that all collection operatives collect the same items every time they collect. I've experienced one item being taken 1 week and left the next. So residents will know what can and cannot be recycled. Number two, when deciding on the number of receptacles being issued, that the storage space of properties is taken into account as a lot of properties were built when only one bin was needed. I think we've touched on this. Also, the ability of residents to carry out lots of bag boxes to the collection point. Question number 3, that collection operatives close the vehicles when returning to the depot to prevent litter being blown lost from the vehicles. Other than these points, the report seems to be a valuable discussion document for the Scrutiny Committee, and I look forward to their decisions. And then we had a real helpful comment coming in of 3 pages of comments coming in from a social media source. Very positive. I'm not going to read these, but what I can assure the person who submitted them, as I said when the officers were here, all these comments will be fed into our officers and they will be fully taken into account. And I'd like to thank the 3 residents who submitted these comments today. They're very, very helpful. So, yeah, Kath wants to come in.
And just for your peace of mind, I'll forward these on to you as well so that you can see them in detail. It's so long that obviously to read it now, but just so you know, you'll have a copy of these as well.
I've dealt with that issue now, and now we come on to the part of the meeting when we have to formulate our recommendations. So I'm going to hand over to Kath now, because Kath's been making copious notes as usual, along with Rachel, of course. I'm not missing you out, Rachel. But Kath, do you want to talk us through some of the...
Okay, members, you'll recall from reading through the report that when we come to section 4, implications, throughout that section there are questions for you as members that the officers would like your viewpoints on. So I think rather than trawling through what we've done and trying to come up with recommendations, if we try and answer each of those first, I think they will formulate your recommendations, but once we've done them, if there's anything else, obviously then we'll add them on at the end. So if we go right to the beginning first, where they asked about whether or not you'd be interested, you think that public consultations should take place. That question was right at the beginning of the report, but we've recently, just before the meeting ended, discussed it, and there was some discussion about maybe it should be considered as engagement rather than consultation. So your view on that is that I tend to think from everything that was said that an engagement exercise is essential. Am I right?
Yeah. I thought, this is listening to comments from members, engagement was the way forward. I know Richard used the language challenge, but I think engagement probably covers it just as well. But importantly as well, some of the more experienced members here talked about some of the stuff that was done when the skinny bins were rolled out, and I think that type of approach would be beneficial. I don't know what members' views are, but Stuart?
Yeah, I was on Cleaner Communities at that time when it was rolled out, and we all had worries about how it would be rolled out, but they've done a very good job in the end, and I hope they do a similar job this time.
Okay, so I'm really pretty unanimous. Yeah. You happy with that, everyone? Yeah. Okay, Kath, that's that one dealt with. And back over to you, Kath.
Okay. All right, so then we go back to 4.2. Sorry to have jumped you around there. So the first question that they are asking you is, are there any additional activities that could be considered to those identified in the recycling and waste strategy that could help Torvine increases recycling performance? So you will have heard all the things that we're doing today, the fact that the stretchy plastic is coming on board, we're looking to change the way the recycling is carried out in order to increase. When we spoke to Craig and asked him that question, the only thing that he said to be aware of going forward is some of the niche products, but he also informed us that we're not in a stage yet in Wales where we can collect some of those things. So taking all of that into consideration, is there any other additional activities you think could be added?
With respect, yeah, I think we've covered all the areas there, and I think we're doing a good job of recycling at the moment.
Yeah, so well, sorry, Norman, you want to come in?
With the success that they've had with the schools, if the school children go home and, tell their grandparents and parents what's going on, that could be one way of getting through to people. Do you know what I mean? Because the children seem to be very, very keen on it, and they could influence the older generation if they don't already recycle.
So shall we couch that? No. chatted about behaviour change, and at the end with Craig, I picked it up with Cunnan a bit. Shall we say we support, and perhaps school education should be reinforced?
Yes.
Would that be a way around that?
They can start it.
Yeah, no, I mean, because they're the future, aren't they?
Exactly.
So that would be, because they were saying there is a cost associated with education. To me, it's not a cost; it's an investment.
It's an investment for the future.
Yeah.
It's not only that. I mean, with the kids, I mean, they're the ones that convince it. As the older people have been staying in their ways. This is when to.
No, yeah. So it's about
children.
We should do anything possible to strengthen
Yes.
educational.
Yeah, I think it all comes out of climate change as well. With schools are very, very aware of the climate change, and they're willing to take part. And this is a very good initiative.
Yeah, fine. Move on.
So if we move then to 4.5, it says, does the committee have a view/preference regarding increasing waste collection efficiency and the potential additional savings that may be realised through the requirement for residents to store their waste in additional waste receptacles? So this is where Cannon showed us the options of different receptacles, but either sticking to the 4 we've already got or having an additional one. During those conversations, the Chair mentioned that much as you might have a view yourself on this, and as a committee, obviously the views and preferences of the residents are what will go forward in the long run, but is there anything else you want to add to that?
I felt the committee were quite taken with the new suggestions, subject to the views of the residents being at the forefront of any deliberations in the future.
Yes.
So I think if we couch it in that sort of language, we're not preempting what our residents are thinking. But we did have a preference to some extent. And as I said, we're not a decision-making body, but so I think we can convey that.
Absolutely.
But the engagement with the public is...
Just come in briefly on that, Jay, because from a personal point of view, obviously, I think it's an improvement of the facilities that we have at the moment.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to make sure that we're not preempting what the public might want.
Yes, I was just going to say, Mr. Chairman, that we don't want this committee to be accused of predetermination. Yes, it's predetermination of the public's opinions. Yes.
But obviously the choice with...
Yeah, our own opinions, yes.
And let Kath move on. I mean, this report and the information we get, I thought was very good, actually. Kath?
4.6. Does committee agree that containing plastic and cans to prevent windblown litter at the curbside should be a key consideration when designing the future collection system?
100%.
Yes.
100%,
Yeah,
yes.
that's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah. Yeah, no.
Okay, 4.7. Does the committee have a view on how we should consult with residents regarding the proposed changes to the collection containers, the collection frequency of cardboard collections and the addition of the curbside collection of small electrical equipment? I think we possibly covered that right at the beginning when we said engagement is essential with residents, in the same vein as was done with the skinny bin. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, 4.8. Does the committee consider it beneficial to introduce a weekly cardboard collection and expand the range of materials collected from the curbside for recycling? So if you're away now, as you're away, cardboard is fortnightly. Going when the new vehicles are in place, there's the opportunity for this to be a weekly collection.
I'm going to speak on a personal basis now, and what I see, and what we have a fortnightly one. To me personally, it's adequate, but bigger families, I think you've got to say to the officers what is collected now on a fortnightly basis. But what I see personally is a fortnight with a bit of blue bag seems adequate. But I think if the officers...
My own view on it was the officers felt, and I think Craig made this point more than the officers, they monitor waste and tonnage, etc., so they've taken all that into account with it. But Norman?
I agree with Ron. For me personally, the fortnightly one is adequate, but after going out to consultation, perhaps other people would have other ideas. So after the consultation, I think we'll know exactly what the public
Okay,
wants.
Stuart.
I tend to agree with my colleagues here, and I think a fortnightly collection is adequate. But I would add a rider to that, Chair, that at certain times here, especially Christmas time, when there is a lot more cardboard around, whether some provision could be done on that basis.
Richard?
Yes, I agree with my colleagues that a cardboard collection of once a fortnight is sufficient at the moment. But if the consultation reveals other views, we'll take those into consideration. And of course, this can always be reviewed if we find that persons are recycling more cardboard than the receptacle has capacity for.
Kath. The only other one we need to touch on, I think we're all in favour of the curbside collection of small electrical equipment. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's an improvement. Okay. You happy with that? Got that, Kath? I think the next one is the
Moving on.
cab
I think so. I'm just finding it in the report.
4.9.
Yeah, 4.9. Does the committee consider it beneficial to introduce in-cab technology and CCTV cameras on the new waste recycling collection fleet?
Norma?
We just heard the officer say how important it is and how it will help them. So I'm all for it.
And I think
It's-
Craig in particular
Yeah, yes.
dealt with this and said you soon have a different dialogue. If, for example, a bin was put out a little bit late, you don't have a dialogue then about you've missed the collection, but what can I do about it? To me, anything that's going to help with that sort of issue is a plus. So I think the committee, yes. Stuart?
I totally agree, Chair. I think this is a good method of capturing bins that haven't been collected, and it's also very useful for people with assisted lifts as well. And when there's drivers on that not usually on their own, it helps them as well, and there's a tracking system. So I think this is a much improved system.
Yeah.
Okay, the last one more.
Go on then.
4.10. Does the committee agree that the council should develop proposals to expand its waste recycling service to our commercial customers?
Personally, Chair, I think we should.
Yeah. Yes. I want to raise it, and I raised it myself in the meeting. I do think it's important with this niche collection, particularly with adult hygiene and nappies, there'll be a lot of people who will be concerned if there's any change to that. So my own view on that is we have to wait for the future, but in the meantime, that needs to continue, I think.
Yeah.
You know, so I'd like to reinforce that.
Yeah, Chair, and with the hygiene products, I mean, I have a resident, well, neighbour, and they didn't realise they could have them picked up. Now it is being collected from her. They have a different collection, like on the nappy ones. But lots of people out there don't realise, and again, it's down to education.
Yeah, well, and if that's... I mean, that wasn't really picked up in the report. It came up because of Craig raising it with us when we asked him for all other things. But I did ask the officers about that, and I know from experience as well where a resident in my ward was having issues with filling the bin up.
Yes.
And it got sorted, and you know, so
That's it,
yeah, no, these things, you know, it's a social service actually, and it's really important. So I'd like just as a committee to reinforce the need for that service.
I totally agree with the other members here. The nappy service is a provision that's well received, and I don't think we could.
No, not any suggestion it would be, but it wasn't in the report, and it came up in the discussions we had with Craig. So
Form of words, shall I read
yeah,
it?
Kath,
Yeah.
please.
Just put a form of words on that. So AHPs, essential that no changes are carried out to this service until further options are available, but at this time those changes are fully communicated.
Yes. We'll move on swiftly. We're going to move to the close of the meeting now. Just to remind members, the next meeting will be held on Thursday, the 19th of March at 1:30. and we'll consider the litter and fly tipping strategy. The pre-meeting for that, Kath, can you remind me?
Yeah, that'll be on the Monday. Previous to that, I'll get the date from you.
Yeah, I think it's 11 a.m, is it?
I'll tell you now.
Just, I should have had this.
I'll give my apologies for that.
For both, pre and, that's fine. But no, I'm just, well, it's standard procedure.
The pre-agenda meeting for that is Monday the 16th at 10:30.
The only other thing with that, Kath, is it says here, as the meeting is rescheduled, we've invited the same invitees that were at the original
Want me to
meeting.
expand?
Yes, please.
Okay, so you recall that this report was supposed to be coming to Cleaner in November of last year. And after the Chair and I worked with officers on it, we felt that it was more consultation with the public needed before it came back. So it's a rescheduled one. When we obviously decided that we were looking at it in November, in the previous meeting, which I believe was September of last year, you put forward suggestions for invitees. Those invitees were asked to come along and agreed to come along. So I checked with the Chair a few weeks ago that was the same. So we've got a resident who is an active volunteer, who volunteers all around the area on litter picking, etc. So I've recontacted him and he's still happy to come along. The other gentleman, some of you might well know, is Thomas Board from Keep Wales Tidy. Yeah, so he agreed to come to the first meeting. I've contacted him, but I haven't heard back from him, so I'll chase that one back up. But in effect, all of the things that were in place for that meeting that was supposed to happen in November is in place here. The only change is a little note that I wrote to the Chair throughout the meeting, is that obviously when this strategy was proposed, it was proposed by Councillor Cross, who was then currently the Executive Member for Environment, and it's something that wasn't in place in this council until she became Exec Member. So she's very keen to still attend that meeting, even though she won't be the Exec Member at that time. So it was your views on that, really, whether or not she comes in a capacity to listen to what has gone on, because it was something that she'd instigated.
Open to the views of the committee. I mean, from my perspective, the new executive member would be very new to this, so there might be a benefit to have the previous executive member, but I'm just open to what your views are.
It wouldn't be instead of Councillor Owen.
Yeah, it would be
Just
what
to
happened
point that
today,
out.
really. So it's entirely within the gift of the committee. So, Stuart, you got reservations?
Yeah.
No, yeah. Richard?
I think I agree with Stuart. He's coming out with the thoughts from you.
Yeah, Mike's in.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as I say, I'm going to apologise, I won't be here, but again, I know where the other colleagues are coming from, but all I've got to say, the new executive member, would she have any objections that come in? Because it's something she started, and they could talk to each other before they come, and Fiona could highlight her mandate.
I think the feeling I'm getting as chair is the view of the committee really is it should be the new executive member attends.
Yeah, I can't see any. Shouldn't be any benefit.
No, I mean, I'm just taking your views into account, and that's the line we're going to take. I'm not going to beat around the bush. No. That's fine.
Chair, can I just make a comment? And the rest of the members, our chief executive on this, that Rachel is in hospital. Should we send a message to it for speedy recovery?
That would be a very good idea, Stuart. Yeah. Kath, can you organise that for us? Thanks. That's a good idea, Stuart. Thank you. Okay, that's we've sorted all that out. So I'd like to thank members and attendees for the meeting, and as always, I mean, the hard work isn't done by us, it's done by Kath and Rachel, and I want to record on webcam my thanks to them because they do a sterling job. So I'm now going to close the meeting to the press and the public, and thank you all.